Dragonlance, writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to Crafting Dragonlance, where I build, write, and prepare for our next session of Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen, which I'm currently running for platinum level patrons of patreon.com/Roguewatson. This is the crafting episode for session 1 of our campaign. If you are playing characters in this campaign, this video is very much not meant for you and will be full of spoilers. For our campaign, we use Roll20.net for recording and possibly streaming. I use OBS Studio. So don't worry that you didn't miss the live stream. I actually didn't live stream this at all. This was kind of a last-minute decision to even be able to fit in a crafting video, but I know that folks were very excited about me running Dragonlance, but were equally disappointed that because I was running it for patrons, they wouldn't be getting crafting videos of it, and I thought that is a good point. So maybe I could try to at least do a crafting video at some point for each session. It's definitely not going to be a normal weekly thing because I don't run this campaign every week, for example. And I'm not even sure I'll be able to live stream them with my pretty tight schedule. And in fact, this week has been extra crazy because it's currently late May, and today is literally the last day of school for my kids' school districts. This whole week has been crazy with award shows and early releases, and this morning I actually just had to take the cat to the vet, so it has been absolutely crazy, and there was no way I was going to be able to try to do a live stream schedule, but I thought maybe I can at least try and squeeze in a video at some point and talk about my plans for this campaign. Again, try to get like one crafting session in or episode in per session. So I don't know if I'll be able to live stream these at any point, but at least be able to kind of upload them, with the caveat that, of course, if you are a patron who is playing in this campaign, you are not watching this, because as you know, what I do with my crafting videos is they're full of spoilers. We talk about plans for the campaign and how things are going and everything, and that would not be information that you need to be privy to. So I really enjoy the Dragonlance campaign. We can go back and look at, I'm actually just using, honestly, a big reason why I love this campaign is because I don't have to change a whole lot of it, at least for a while. Unlike a lot of campaigns that I've run where I've had to like either completely redo the story, like in Rime of the Frost Maiden, or at least redo like bits and pieces of different areas. This one is just a pretty well put together campaign. I think it's kind of underrated because it's Dragonlance, and that has its own, specific world with a very specific timeline and a kind of restrictive the way they do magic, for example, and the gods and the various races or species are not nearly as diverse, for example, as the Forgotten Realms is now. So kind of going back to like a Tolkien-esque setting, really. But I like this particular campaign. I think it does a great job. I think it is set at a very specific timeline, which is at the very basically start of where the main series starts, like literally the original trilogy written in the 80s. So I guess I should mention the fact that I am a Dragonlance fan, but I should have an asterisk on there, like, I'm a lapsed fan, right? I haven't really paid attention to Dragonlance in probably the last 15 years until like, I think either this year or last year, where I just read the most recent book that Weiss and Hickman did. I forget what it's called, but some Dragons of something. And I thought that book was terrible. Like, I did not think it was a great written novel at all, and it really soured me on the whole thing. I was like, oh no. But so I may be looking at the old books, with very like nostalgic rose-tinted glasses and things, because I read them as teenager basically. I didn't discover the series until the 90s, so by then there was already like 10 years worth of books and novels and things. And probably the best way I can describe Dragonlance in terms of the story structure is it's very Star Wars like, where when you watch like a Star Wars show, the first thing you have to wonder is like, okay, where does this take place, right? Does it take place during the prequels? Is it in between prequels, the original trilogy? Is it like set in the middle of Empire Strikes Back? Like, what timeline are we set in? Because we've always have that timeline where things happen in a specific order. That's very much how Dragonlance operates, right? It's like, here is the timeline, things happen in a certain order. There's the Age of Despair, which leads into the I forget what the fourth age is called. Age of Heroes, I guess. I don't know. I forget. But that's where the Dragon of Autumn Twilights and Winter's Night and Spring Dawning and all those take place. Is when the gods basically start coming back into the world, and you've got Taunus and Flint and Gold Moon with the staff, and all these big events happen that really dictate a start of another era to Dragonlance. And then you've got the Chaos War that happens, and then the Fifth Age that happens, and like suddenly like sorcerers are a thing, and so it's very specific where things are and what's allowed. And this particular campaign takes place at the very start of that first written novel. There is a prehistory that exists also, kind of like Knights of the Old Republic or something. But in this case, this is like the very first novel, and this takes place really, I think, in like the months leading up to it, basically, but in a totally different area, which is smart. So we're looking at the big cool, which I love this map. I didn't even create a loading screen for our campaign. I'm just using this map because I think it's so cool to just see like a giant cool map of the Dragonlance world, and they really did it justice here. So I love this thing to death. This is just our like opening splash page. This is like the poster map that comes with the campaign book. And, you know, the main storyline of the original trilogy takes place in the southern end of the continent, and I think they eventually end up in the central, I think it's Naraka is where the ending takes place, but they start in, like, Solace, and they go through, like, the Plains of Dust. It's all this, like, southern area down here. Meanwhile, the campaign that we're looking at takes place entirely in, like, this little area right here. The Northern Wastes and the Hinterland. And then I actually have to zoom in because it's so far. You can see my players drew a circle around the actual starting town of Vogler. But it's all on the east side, kind of the border between Solamnia and Estwild, Nordmar, which is kind of where basically all the villains, the like hobgoblins and goblin armies and ogres and things who are in charge of Takissis, which is, she's basically Tiamat, but not really. She's like a 5-headed dragon who is also Mother of Dragons kind of a thing, the goddess of dragons. But she has like entire armies, and she's much more like effective, I guess, than Tiamat ever was. And she's got a much better PR department. And she's already marching her armies, she's conquered like this whole area on the eastern side and is now marching her way west. And I forget where she is in the conquest by the time the first book starts. But now this campaign basically takes place kind of a little bit earlier in that conquest and has the players witnessing their first big attacks on the city of Vogler, which is where they start, and of course gets overrun and attacked, and then they eventually have to flee to Kalaman, which is a much bigger city. Is it going to load in better? Okay, there it goes. I'm going to wait for the resolution for a second. Textures to load, and then they'll escape to Kalaman, which is a much bigger city, and that's basically where the rest of the campaign takes place, although there is a big section. I guess they're only actually in Kalaman for one chapter. And then they go through, in fact, I should go chapter by chapter real quick. So chapter 1 is annoyingly character creation. So the actual campaign doesn't start till chapter 2, which is where we actually ran the Preludes, which was in session 0. So hopefully you've already seen that, because I thought that went really well, and I was able to run. I have not seen a campaign do a 5th edition campaign do this, by the way, where they really created a cool like introductory sequence that's bespoke. Not entirely bespoke, but it divides into 3 different categories. Basically, arcane spellcasters, which you kind of have to be part of the Mages of High Sorcery, or you're a hopeful divine spellcaster. But remember, divine spellcasting doesn't exist right now because the gods are not here. So that's a big deal about why that starts in. Or you're basically everybody else, which is still a fun prelude because it's the meeting of the Draconians for the first time, which is this sequence right here where you get to just see them. You don't actually... In fact, I didn't even have them fight the Draconians. I just had it be a scene because I didn't want any one of these scenes where I divided up my giant party of players into too long of events. Instead, they were kind of like cinematic cutscenes, but with a little bit of interactivity thrown in there in the form of like a skill check or like, what do you do in this area kind of a thing. So I really enjoyed doing these preludes, and I thought it worked really well to do them as part of session 0. Instead of a session 1. So I very much, if you usually skip session 0s because you're like, I don't really care about, that whole process, I highly recommend you go and watch our session 0. At least watch the last, maybe hour or so. I don't know exactly when it starts, but so you can see those preludes because they are pretty important, especially when it comes to those characters who are associated with the gods. The gods actually speak to those characters, and I do a cool thing where I basically teased the main villain, who is Consaldi Fire Eyes, who is riding a dragon, and again, dragons don't even exist really in this world either. They've been gone for centuries. So this is all very much a cool big deal event that's going to be happening that players don't know about. Draconians aren't a thing yet, so they're just learning about that. So I was able to tease her as a villain, and I was able to tease the fact that Takissis is like the one that, you know, they're all crumbling god statues, and she's the one statue that's like fully built. So that's a tease that like, hey, Takesis is here, she's doing shit, and the other gods are like barely coming through on like a bad connection, and they've given some divine power. And what's interesting is it's not all like we have a party of like there's 4 clerics that all attended this. In fact, out of the 4 people who were involved in that Broken Silence prelude where they saw the gods, only one of them was an actual cleric. The other 2 were bards, and I believe one was a barbarian, which is cool because the other piece of advice I would say is that a lot of character classes in 5th edition, if you realize, have spell-like abilities, right? That doesn't really mesh very well with Dragonlance, which is a much more Tolkien-esque, like magic is a much more rare thing that like only very few people possess, in this case like the mages of high sorcery. So I was trying to really come up with a way of like, well, why would a lot of these classes that have obvious spell-like abilities even exist in 5th edition? The book, or sorry, in the Dragonlance setting, the adventure book does not try to do that at all. They just say, hey, whatever, you want to be a warlock, you want to be a sorcerer, you want to be an eldritch knight, like, we don't care, go for it. So they don't bother doing that. I do take it a step further, and I usually don't do this. I'm usually pretty, you know, loosey-goosey when it comes to characters being able to do whatever, but I was like, you know what, I respect the Dragonlance stuff, I really like it, I've got, you know, dozens of books still on my shelf. We're going to try to do this by the books, in other words. And the way I did that was I said, okay, well, if you want to have those kind of abilities, we either have to flavor them as more mundane stuff, but it's like you just have superhero training that allows you to do those kind of things, or you do have a relationship with one of the gods, and they're very much like Greek mythology gods, where they're just, you know, delightful little bitchy gods who get involved in mortal affairs all the time. They appear as, they literally walk the earth, appeared as different characters in the novels, and get into all kind of cute little shenanigans. So you could do that and not even be a cleric necessarily. So for example, one of the Prelude people who was involved with one of the gods was a barbarian, but it was a barbarian who's planning on going with Path of the World Tree. So like, all right, well, let's go with, now I forgot the name of that god who's involved in the, they give you a nice thing about the gods. Zivilian, I believe, is which is funny because it's like the calm wisdom. It's like, well, maybe the barbarian's like, you know what, fuck calm wisdom, you need to be raging. But that's the point, is like, let your players be more open-ended about encouraging them to be involved in gods, even if they're not literal clerics. But you don't have to be a cleric, you just have to have that excuse to have that divine power. In the opposite case, for example, we have a ranger who said, well, instead of being involved in the gods, how about we just have it be all your ranger spells are flavored as just very particular set of skills that you have. So for example, we could even do cure wounds as like, hey, you know, a certain salve that you can apply. Mechanically, it's going to be the same thing as casting cure wounds. You're using spell slots, you're doing all that, so I'm not changing all of that. But I'm just saying, flavor-wise, because it wouldn't make sense for a ranger to actually have access to healing magic unless you're involved with a god, then we're going to make it so it's just all these certain skills. Now, that does get a little... And, you know, you could do it with, like, speak with animals. You'd be like, oh, well, I'm a dog whisperer or whatever. I understand these things. Some of them are going to be easier than others, admittedly. Like, Entangle is going to be a really tricky thing to set that up. We could say, like, hey, maybe you set up, like, a trap ahead of time or something. You know, it's going to be... Some of the things are going to be a little tricky to tie ourselves in knots about. But I think, ultimately, that's gets me the best way to do it. So I'm talking a little bit about the preludes here because I think it's important to get the setting right for what we're doing in Dragonlance. Also, I banned warlocks, I banned sorcerers, and I'm using the 2024 halflings. Well, by the way, we're playing 2024 rules, in case you didn't know that from Session 0. And unfortunately, that means the Kender and the sorcerer subclass are not being used, but we can use Kender. We're just using the halfling species from 2024, but then our one player who expressed interest in being a Kender, which I'm glad we have at least one, did mention if she could swap some of the traits for halfling to Kender, and I said that's totally fine. That Kender is introduced in this book. And then for the two custom backgrounds, the Knight of Solamnia and the Mage of High Sorcery, I said, well, let's just use some of the backgrounds that are in the book, because remember, backgrounds in 2024 are a much bigger deal. They've got their own, stat adjustments and all that stuff. So basically, we're reflavoring like either guard or normal, noble or soldier, for example, could be like the Knight of Solamnia background, and we'll kind of go from there. So I haven't determined if I want to use maybe those feats as like milestone rewards for players that want to go down those particular set of paths. So that's everything setting up for. And then the other I guess thing I should mention is I did tell everybody before we did session 0 is have a connection to, which it does mention in the book, have a connection to Ispin Greenshield, who is a character who is recently passed, an adventurer, and his funeral is the reason people are coming to Vogler. That's like why they're arriving here, which again, I like that as an adventure hook. That's a good hook. It's not just, hey, here's a bunch of random like reasons why you're here. It's like, no, here's a certain character, here's a funeral taking place, and you all know him. And I said you could either know him or you are associated with the town of Vogler to where you're there for whatever reason. Anyway, I mean, it's the Kingfisher Festival. It's their big, like, big holiday festival that they put on. So maybe you're there for that reason. But I think everybody is decently associated with Green Shield in some way. So that'll be nice for the session 1 purposes, because session 1 is very RP heavy. So that actually starts off with chapter 3. So again, annoyingly, the way it's set up is that the actual campaign starts in chapter 3, which is called When Home Burns. So chapter 3 has the players arriving in the town of Vogler, which we've got a nice map for. And they have some NPCs they can talk to. They're being summoned by Becklin, who is a fellow adventurer and a current knight of Solamnia, who traveled with Ispin Greenshield, who is this kind of just world-traveled adventurer and had retired in Vogler and has recently passed. And the idea is he, through his travels, helped out or met or inspired the player characters who are involved in the story. And that's why they come here. And there's a fun chance where they actually have a funeral, and the party can, say their goodbyes and be able to say their things. I like this scene right here in particular that shows Becklin and then Cudgel, which is another one of his fellow adventurers. And they actually lower the boat with the body, and there's a nice little funeral scene. There's a couple little places the party can visit, which we do have a really nice map here, and Roll20 has them on the GM layer, so you can kind of decide which places you want to dictate as an area of interest. The main things I want to do is make sure the players have a nice scene with Becklin, who's a major character here. Cudgel, to an extent, I need to make sure the party can meet her as well, because she becomes a little more important with the fact that her mercenary group is the one that is betraying, although I'm thinking I may change that as a little bit of a story change. And then Darrett, who is a classic like NPC cheerleader that the party is supposed to like. That's always tricky because you can't really, at least with my Friday group, like it's always like, I don't know, it's hard to tell which NPCs they're going to like, right? But ones that do hold their own, are competent in combat, and are general cheerleaders for the party, I think could go over pretty well. But that's what Darrett Highwater is. He's a just absolute sweetheart, and he's a squire to Becklin. Any of these characters can be killed, by the way, which is kind of nice. None of them are actual mission critical. And in fact, I may lean towards having at least somebody die in this opening thing. Darrett is supposed to survive the whole time and become kind of a rise to commander thing, but it's a very weird, like almost DMPC that I don't want to really run into here, where it's like, oh well, I'm commanding suddenly this character who is, starts off as a squire, has now risen to a knight, and now he's in command and he's commanding the players around. It almost feels like that should be like one of the storylines for the players. So I'm still not quite sure. It's pretty nebulous about how I want to use Darrett, but I think Becklin and or Cudgel are even supposed to die here, or at least get seriously injured or something in the attack of Vogler. So I want to make sure to introduce those characters. They will have a chance to shop, but generally in session 0, I always just say like, you guys can do whatever shopping you need to prep, because we don't really like to do shopping in our actual sessions. It just seems kind of tedious, frankly. So we've got the funeral, we've got, and the Kingfisher Festival, which is, there's not really as many things to do as I thought there was when I first saw this. In fact, there's really only one thing to do, which is the fishing competition, which is still fun. There's a whole table, the party rolls a d20, and then, or each person gets to roll a d20, you do this 3 times, and then that determines what fish you've got on the line, and then that determines what survival check you need to make in order to catch said fish. There's a little bit of competition. There's no real reward. You just kind of get a little commemorative trophy. I could reward inspiration, but frankly, during the Preludes, anytime people succeeded on a good check in the Prelude, I gave them inspiration, and most players got inspiration that way. So they're actually starting this campaign with inspiration already, because I thought that was a fun, nice early game reward to give the party. So maybe it'll just be a nice little commemorative trophy that they can win in this festival. So there's not actually that many activities, but like I said, there's more. Like there's the whole funeral to do. You can meet, there's a heckler, Baccharis, who's kind of a, who basically is a Joffrey, what's the other, Joffrey and Draco Malfoy, and literally like a blonde, spoiled asshole prick character, who's like just rich asshole kid, who is meant to not go over very well at all with the party, but because he's a noble, the party can't just like push him around necessarily. I mean, you can give him a charisma check, I guess, to make him back off, but you can't like slap him or fight him or something, which is a reason why I'm glad I'm frankly running this for my patron group and not for my players, because I think my players would not have treated this setting necessarily with the serious RP qualities that I would really be hoping to get with a lot of these interactions, and especially in this first session, because I really think this first session is going to be almost all social encounters. I've got stuff set up for the fishbowl, I think is where they'll first meet Darrett. The Brass Crab Inn is where they'll first meet Becklin. I think I'll wait and have Cudgel be at the funeral that night. So basically they can meet Becklin at the Brass Crab, and then she'll tell them about the funeral at the night. Then they can go to like the market or the fishbowl and the village circle and go to a few places. And then night happens, and then there's the actual funeral scene. Which, by the way, I'm using Tessa's maps. I don't remember it's called Tessa's map something, but Tessa. She's on the DM's Guild, and then on Roll20 you can just add them as an add-on, but it comes with like 100 maps for Dragonlance specifically. So I've got all these. So normally I would just get these 3 right here, which is the town map, which is a really good town map. That's what you're looking at now. It's amazing. And you could just use this town map because there's not any combat until we get to Battle of High Hill, and that's the actual combat encounter. But because we have all these cool scenes, I'm tempted to use them. I don't think I've put tokens on the map just yet. I haven't put player tokens. I put some NPC tokens, but you can see here's the Brass Crab, like during the day where they first meet Becklin, and then the night one I've got set up for the actual funeral ahead of time. You can see there's the mayor, and then Cudgel and Becklin there on the stage, a bunch of just commoner NPCs, and then there's Baccharis, our Joffrey Dracoy prickhole. And then, set up with a couple different scenes throughout here, I believe. I don't think I've set up the village circle for... I think it's just set up for the fishbowl, but not necessarily the... Oh, it is decorated. That's nice. So I could use it for the Kingfisher Festival if I wanted to. Like I said, there's not a whole lot of actual mingling to do in the festival itself. So I don't know if I'll actually switch to that map when I'm using the festival. I haven't decided on that yet, but... So we'll get through those social encounters, the funeral where they meet Cudgel, and the next morning they go to Thornwall Keep, where Becklin will basically tell them about the reenactment battle that happens, which is a really fun, like kind of a Civil War-esque reenactment they do with the town, where they celebrate their founding over a battle with some a rival, or it was Istar actually. So it was the big, the kind of the Holy Empire nation that was basically the cause of the cataclysm in the first place. And that takes place north of town, which is where the big battle happens. So there's like a little, basically Becklin tells them, hey, we really want you to be included here. You join the militia and come in and, battle with us, and I'll give you his +1 shield, which is nice. And get an item right off the bat, magic item. So the whole session will presumably culminate in this battle. Now, one thing I don't know is how long all of these various social scenes will happen. I've got like 6 pages of dialogue and information and cutscene stuff happening here. I feel like if it was my Friday group, we would go pretty quick, but because this group is generally more RP and social heavy, I think we'll be taking our time. And the tricky thing also here is that the book says, hey, your party should really like Vogler, basically. I don't know where exactly it mentions that, but it says try to ingratiate like Vogler with your party. They're very friendly people. Here we go. There it is. Deliberate welcome. Good-natured visitors of all walks. Play up its quaint charms and hospitable locales. Vogler should begin to feel like a home away from home for the characters, and the villagers might even become like family to them. Later in the chapter, when Vogler suffers a disaster, the characters should feel the loss of Vogler's destruction, wanting to save the villagers and help their friends. Which is another reason why during character creation, as a DM, I told the party, hey, have a connection to Ispen Greenshield and or the town of Vogler. And I believe several people know Vogler or have even lived here or maybe are from here. So that'll change the dialogue and the situation somewhat, admittedly, because the book expects them to be new arrivals. So like they don't know all the things and you're basically having to describe it. But not, for some players, that'll be their first time here. But others, they may feel that sting even deeper, is like, oh, I've got real ties to this particular location. So that's a reason why I wanted to have people be familiar with Vogler and not just spring that on them. And I think it does help from just a character creation standpoint, is let your players know kind of at least the starting situation and what kind of important connections they can have, and then they can still have their own backstories and stuff on top of their own NPC relationships. So if I were writing this as a novel and I knew exactly where I wanted to end the first session, again, I don't know exactly how it's going to happen, is I would have it end probably at the start of the Betrayal at High Hill event. So this is the actual first battle of the whole session, or sorry, of the campaign, is during the reenactment. And the reenactment is, normally the reenactment takes the militia of the town and they divide the militia up and then do a mock battle. They literally have like blunted spears or something, and they run at each other and fight, and they all like dramatically like fall over. Like a little fun little Civil War enactment, I guess. And the town people clap and stuff, and the enemy is supposed to retreat. Well, what happens this time is Cudgel, who is one of Ispen's adventurers, she has her own mercenary company, and apparently, let's see, make sure I get this right. Unbeknownst to the village, Cudgel's lieutenant in the Ironclad Regiment, which is the name of her company, Gregonis, who's a half-ogre, which is a good low-level boss stat block, has betrayed his leader. In fact, has the half-ogre stat block changed? Let's see, because I'm having to redo, a lot of the tokens and stuff in 2024. Half-ogre. Does a half-ogre exist, actually? Ooh, that's interesting. You know what? I think they got rid of halves, didn't they? I'd probably still use this half-ogre stat block thing, because I don't know what the equivalent of that would be for the 2024. Would it be a tough? Because tough is the new thug. Let's see what the tough stat block is like. Real quick. Tough has an AC of 12, hit points of 32. Does have pack tactics. Armed with a mace and a crossbow. Plus 4 to hit. Deals 1d6 plus 2 bludgeoning damage. Wow, the half-ogre is a lot stronger. Is armed with a battle axe, dealing 2d8 plus 3 slashing damage. Okay, but still has the same low AC and hit points. So interesting. Does more damage, but doesn't have the pack tactic, so it doesn't have advantage, and still only has 1 attack. Okay. I may go ahead and keep the half-ogre. Does make sense where he would be stronger, because he's literally larger, and half-ogres are definitely a thing in the Dragonlance world. But that's interesting that tough is pretty similar. I think a regular ogre would be too tough, though. I think they have like twice the hit points. So I think I'm gonna keep the half-ogre. But that is something I'm gonna have to check for like every stat block, basically. So unfortunately, Roll20 I don't think has a way of like just upgrade all my shit to 2024 rules. It doesn't do that. So the entire campaign, even though I've set it to 2024, just means all the new character sheets are using those rules. But for my NPC tokens and stat blocks, they're all the original 2014. So anything I use, I will have to upgrade to the 2024 sheet if they are indeed different. At the very least, I think the token art is different, but I think we'll keep Gregonis as a half-ogre stat block. But what happens is that they've betrayed Cudgel. Let's see. Paid off many of the mercenaries under his command, with the exception of Cudgel and a few mercenaries who aren't attending the reenactment. The entire company secretly plans to attack lethally during the mock battle. So it's a pretty nasty surprise where the party is even involved, and they've got like their mock weapons and things. And they're going to, run at the enemy. And there's even a moment where it says like, so whoever has the highest passive perception can see that there's like real weapons glinting off the enemy, even though they're supposed to have blunted weapons as well. And then a charge happens, and all of a sudden it's just a brutal Slaughter, where suddenly this trained mercenary force with real weapons just absolutely starts hacking apart poor militia who's not even there with real weapons. And the party, I think, is meant to not have their weapons either. Ooh, that's a really tricky thing, isn't it? Let's see what it says. Battle begins. Let's see. Is it all part of this one? Two groups charge. Of each character make a perception check. Character rolls the highest. Yeah, sees the real steel weapons. I guess the party is meant to have like blunted weapons. Participants are encouraged to use their own armor, but are given wooden spears with padded tips to prevent them from dealing damage. The mayor reminds everyone not to use real weapons during the reenactment so nobody gets hurt. And then the enemies are all using the guard stat block, and then the militia also use the guard stat block, but their spears are padded and deal no damage. That's a tricky thing with players, though. Do you say, all right, players need to put their weapons somewhere else? Or you just let them like have their weapons on them, but they're just wielding these like... I would probably, for the best case scenario, I think you just give them these spears, but let them still like have their weapons equipped, or like on them. Because that feels too mean to have them go through this whole sequence. And it also would just make the like wizards and casters just that much more powerful for the poor martial guys. So I guess you could argue like, oh, well, your stuff's in a pile somewhere nearby, but that's probably the way I would do it, is just have them have like all their equipment is still on them, but they're just wielding their stuff, so instantly they can change their real equipment. But all the other guards and stuff would not normally carry probably their real stuff. I don't know, like you imagine some people that go to reenactments, I've never been one, but probably might carry real knives on them. And just if a real fight broke out, then like, oh shit, now we've got some knives. So maybe that gets represented, but I think that would be the most compelling way to end the first session, would be on that moment where they either first see, they see like the steel and the real tips and things, and then they charge, or wait till the actual clash and then see it. So I may describe it that far. So basically, it would end right before combat would break out with the party, is probably how it would start it, which means we could possibly go through this entire first session. Again, if all these roleplay things take as long as they do, with the funerals and the meeting all these NPCs and stuff and doing the Kingfisher Festival, if all of that takes a good amount of time, and then we can actually end it with the start of that battle, is where I would want to do it. If things go by really quickly, then I need to be, I guess, prepared to actually execute the battle, but I'm thinking we might not even get that far. Yeah, and then they have a little, I think I believe there's a table. So this is the actual battlefield here, Battle of High Hill, which is, honestly, I've been spending so long on the RP stuff that I haven't spent a whole lot of time, which is another reason why I'm thinking I might end it here. I've not had a lot of time to prepare for this combat, which I actually do kind of like this map. So the way they did this, hey, you're in the middle of a battlefield map, is they just kind of had this, I don't know, border colored, like, looks like fire. But that's to be like, if you're anywhere around or touching this area, then you have to like take damage, because it's like, how do you mimic the idea that there's an ongoing war, but I'm not literally having, tokens on the map and having everybody, roll initiative and all this stuff. It's just like little skirmishes in the middle of a giant battle, which is how, any cinematic thing does it. When you see like Game of Thrones or Braveheart or something, like, yeah, the big camera shows everybody clashing together, but then the camera zooms in and it's got, William Wallace cutting a dude's head off, or Jon Snow kicking a bunch of dudes' asses and stuff. So, but they're still like surrounded by the enemy, and different things are happening. So 15-foot wide area marked by the design of the edge of the map represents dozens of clashing combatants. If anybody enters the fray, capital F, must succeed on DC 16 deck save or take 2d6 slashing damage. That's pretty bad, by the way, for level 2. I should have mentioned we're starting this campaign at level 2. Technically, it was level 1, and then the prelude happens and you get to level 2, but I just had the party, because we didn't really have any battles or anything going on in the preludes. I just went ahead and have everybody made their character at level 2. The 2024 rules say if your players are experienced enough, just go ahead and start them at level 3, but I think it was still valuable having them be level 2, and then literally after this battle sequence, they'll be level 3. So, which I don't think we're gonna be able to fit this entire battle. Gosh, that does get tricky with the level 3 level up, though, doesn't it? So if we do the entire RP part in session 1, session 2 then would be the Battle of High Hill. But I don't know if that's actually going to be long enough for an entire session. And then they're supposed to level up after that. But what I could probably do is say, all right, we'll do the battle. We'll go back to Vogler and do some of the, like, you know, scouting stuff and interrogations and whatnot, and then end the session. And then they'll get to level 3 at the end of that session. So ideally, I would level them up at the end of one session from 2 to 3. But it might actually, looking like it'll take us a full 2 sessions. Unless we can get this through this entire common encounter. Like I said, I'll try to have this like minimally prepared just in case in order for us to run this common encounter, that means we would have to get through like all the social stuff basically in the first half of the session, and only then would I feel confident enough to actually run this combat encounter, knowing it would take, you know, probably half a session if I really want to do it right. It is tricky to remember that combat can go quicker when players don't have nearly as much to do. You know, right? But we're also new characters, so it might take us a little bit longer to figure out our character stuff. But we're only level 2, so we don't have like, you know, extra attacks and all that crazy stuff. But there are events you can do, which is interesting. And I could remember what I did for Call from the Deep. We had a lot of cinematic war scenes. I had these events happen like at the start of a round, and I believe it says here, roll on the High Hill battlefield events table. Each round initiative count 0. So at the end of the round, all this basically crazies event, which I do love this, and I think I might have even stole this. This maybe might have been my inspiration for doing Call from the Deep's tables, which always went over really well with the party. They like the idea of having random chaos that basically created that feeling of being in a big war zone with things ongoing that the party wasn't in control of, nor maybe not even the enemy was in control of, just things happening. In this case, it's a D4 table. You've got arrows landing at the party. We have to make a dex save or take some damage. Horses trample across the battlefield. They have to make a dex save or fall prone. An injured member of Vogler's militia crawls to the battlefield and begs for help, appearing in an unoccupied space adjacent to the fray nearest a random character. That one's interesting because there's no real consequence, but I guess there's just a kind of a moral dilemma the party has to be dealt with that they should try to do. I guess the idea is they have them be a help action or something. But you don't really get a reward necessarily, but hopefully helping somebody is its own reward. I'm thinking too much of a video game logic where it's like, what's my reward here? Or the fourth one is a hostile guard with 6 hit points appears in unoccupied space, and then basically is added to the initiative, but they are injured, so they only start with 6 hit points. Again, level 2, so guards are a pretty standard stat block to deal with, I think, basically. Similar to the bandit stat block. I think guards have better armor, maybe? Yeah, 16 armor. That new guard stat block's looking nice. Otherwise, they're just armed with regular spears, +3 to attack, so that's pretty good. But they could stick around because that AC 16 is no joke for level 2 to deal with. So, that's what they have to deal with. Let's see. Do they actually have, like, enemies that they deal with at first? Characters have little opportunity to aid the villagers being attacked as 3 guards, each mounted on a war horse, appear on the road at the south edge of the battlefield and focus their attacks on the characters. Okay. So, that's a pretty big force for the party to deal with. So they have to deal with guards mounted on war horses. Why is there... There's too many here. So that's 3 guards and 3... Oh my lord, what is happening? Alright, Roll20 has completely shit the bed on me. It did not like me copying and pasting things. We might have to refresh this page. I have not had that happen before. I'm using jump gate. Let's just try refreshing it. So they'll have to deal with... There's only 2 battles, it sounds like. There's guards on war horses, and then there's the actual boss battle, which is probably appropriate. Like, all right, so let's copy you, paste you, And then copy and paste. Okay. I'll have to refresh how mounted combat works in 2024 as well, in case that changed. And then Darrett can be with the party. I wonder if he would have his sword with him. Darrett's actually really powerful, by the way. I believe he's the veteran stat block, which is a lot stronger than the PCs are. Yeah, 50 hit points, AC of 18. And he has 2 melee attacks with his great sword. And a leadership ability, which is cool. Basically gives somebody a bless effect. So I don't know. Could be very helpful in the battle. Maybe he could even rush in. Like he's fighting some other. Gotta find a good way of using Darrett in here without taking away from the party, though, necessarily, also. So the party has to deal. By the way, I did refresh, okay? So they have to fight the Warhorse forces. And then I guess after that one battle with the 3 guards and the 3 Warhorses, then they have to fight Dragonlance, who's a half ogre, which we just looked at that stat block, along with 4 mercenaries, so 4 more guards. So the party has no chance to short rest. Just these 2 battles on top of each other, which I think that's going to be plenty for them to deal with. Plus, if you add this D4 at the end, they're possibly getting knocked prone, possibly taking damage, and possibly adding new guards every initiative order. That could be pretty nasty. So I could see why. I guess the only thing I'm debating on is whether I want to put Darrett with them right at the beginning, or if, or if I want to have him be just a padded spear, also like the others, or maybe he's got a weapon he can use. Maybe I won't have him have his great sword. Maybe he can just pull a dagger out. So instead, it would be a 1d4 plus 3 because he doesn't have his sword. That might be better. He's not in any danger of getting killed with his stats. Jeez. If anything, it would be later on. I don't think he is supposed to get killed or injured in this battle, but during the major battle, he is. The biggest thing I want to look at story-wise, though, is the fact that you just meet Cudgel. She plays up her mercenary group, and she's like, yeah, I'm excited about them, you know, doing this other part. And then they suddenly just attack the party. The party's going to be like, well, what the fuck? So, and the idea is that Cudgel was also betrayed, and she takes, what does it say for Cudgel? Is it back in Vogler? Or is it the end of Betrayal at High Hill where they mention... It's also weird, like, Becklin and Cudgel are not with them necessarily. I guess they're just kind of hanging back. Because Cudgel was supposed to lead the other team. The mercenaries retreat... Okay, after the Dragonlance and his 4 guards, which is a nice little boss battle, the mercenaries scatter and the battlefield encounter ends. The mercenaries' retreat is further motivated by the arrival of the horrified commander Cudgel Ironsmith, along with Mayor Raven, Becklin, and several burly spectators. The group has already seen some fighting as treacherous mercenaries tried and failed to kill Cudgel at Dragonlance' order. So I guess she's there, but she just gets... you know what? That might be the fun inciting incident to do, actually, now that I think about it. Maybe have her at the, waving at the team, and then have... But... I also thought it'd be interesting to have it where she's like, but that's not those aren't my mercenaries. Like, so it turns out like the mercenaries actually killed and replaced, like the enemy forces killed and replaced first, but I guess most of the enemies Draconian though. There are high-level Draconians who can shapeshift, or the certain kinds, but now I'm getting too into the weeds of things the players don't need to know about yet. So I'm going back and forth on that, but maybe the best thing to do is the betrayal, but showcase that Cudgel was betrayed along with the rest by a couple of her forces, basically. Dragonlance being kind of the biggest and the ringleader behind this betrayal, but it does mention that not all of her forces. So it'd probably be like Cudgel along with several of her. In fact, there's another one called Javev, who is one of her scouts, and I think he's still loyal, I believe, to... Responsible for everything at High Hill. She gives the village the complete support of the Ironclad Regiment. Favors a peaceful response to the mysterious army, one backed by mercenary spears. Okay. It's also weird the party sends the NPC scout out instead of the party, or the town sends out instead of the party dealing with that. I almost worry there's too many things going on that really leads the party by the hand. So I'm going to try to be fast and loose with that and have some of these NPCs as like backups in case the party doesn't think to do certain things. But if they do take the initiative, then you might not even need some of these NPCs like that Javiv character necessarily. But putting Cudgel in danger here might be the more interesting place. Maybe that would be the first moment of the sign that a betrayal really happens, the fact that they see real weapons. The bad thing is it just kind of paints Cudgel as being really incompetent or something. If she's there and doesn't like notice the fact that her, soldiers are suddenly wielding like real ass weapons. Maybe they're taking their real weapons out. So maybe that could be a scene. Like the party is there, everybody's about to charge, and then suddenly you see like, I don't know, maybe 75% of Cudgel's forces. Maybe the scene is like you see the half ogre, which I want to paint him as the boss of the whole thing, and it is him doing this. He gives a signal, and suddenly everybody pulls out real weapons, and then maybe he like plants an axe in her back or something, and they charge. In fact, maybe the charge happens on both sides, and Cudgel's like leading the charge, and then you see Greganis and several of them like take a couple steps, get out their real weapons, and then they charge and start hacking apart, Cudgel's ones that haven't betrayed him, basically. And then, which I don't know how many there's supposed to be, by the way. I don't think it ever necessarily says. Is there 100 on each side? Is there like 24? I'm not quite sure about that. To figure that out too. So that might be the best scene to do is like, oh shit, Cudgel. But maybe it would be like she's still alive if the party can try to save her. Because I think she's supposed to survive. But as I mentioned, she doesn't need to necessarily survive. Because I don't think... I mean, she's there for the battle, the final battle. Yeah, and I like that it mentions Becklin, Cudgel, and the mayor for all these different events and things. So this chapter still goes on for quite a while, by the way, after this. There's a lot left, but this gets them to level 3, essentially, this one big battle moment. It is awkward that I've got so much social stuff planned, and then the battle, and I think we'll end before the battle, and then I don't think this battle would take a whole nother session. So, but we always like to level up at the end of a session. So there may just be a moment when we do this whole battle, we do the aftermath, maybe we do an interrogation. It says if the party doesn't think to keep somebody captured, then they've got somebody basically that they can interrogate. So we'll do a little bit more with that in the next session. And then we can have everybody level up to 3. And then the party starts dealing with like, they learn about the fact there's an enemy forces encampment. Maybe somebody thinks to like follow the enemy or something and track them and find the army there. Like I would certainly allow that as well. So there's a lot of options for the party to deal with. And then eventually things come to a head where the town is basically full on invaded by this army who's waiting in the wings, who was just hoping to take out the militia, which they did take a lot of the militia out and weaken to the town. And they come in and just crush the whole town with this giant invasion, which is where we've got all these extra cool map scenes from the Tessa's maps. You can see there's multiple encounters here of the town just being aflame and burned. And the party is it's a full evacuation event, which is a great opening thing to have happen. So it's interesting that we might not actually get to the cool, big, inciting incident until actually the 3rd session, because we've got all these other things. The story really takes its time. In other words, it's not like what is the Tyranny of Dragons, which starts off with a town just like getting destroyed. It's like here we've got multiple sessions of the party like getting to know the NPCs and getting to know the town and being friendly with them, and then we've got the whole like there's actual enemies afoot and there's this whole army encampment. How do we deal with that? Or the logistics of helping save the town, and then there's the big attack of the town. So that's kind of the big session 1, 2, 3 thing I've got planned, and that's even if the evacuation of Vogler takes a full session. I don't know about so that's the big thing about running live D&D stuff, is that it's technically not, I mean it is live, but I don't live stream it, but I don't know when the perfect moments for starting and stopping all the different sessions are. But ideally, for the purpose of this crafting video, I'm saying that I've got all the social stuff planned for Vogler, the funeral, the Kingfisher Festival, the arrival, all the NPCs the party can meet, and then the arrival to Battle of High Hill. And then ideally I would end it with kind of that shocking scene that like, oh shit, the enemy forces are actual real enemy forces and they're charging at us and the militia is absolutely not prepared. That's how I would want to end this first session. And the next crafting, I think we could talk about the actual battle, as well as all the implications for the the army and just the next steps that the party can take while in Vogler. But I'm thinking this third chapter, you know, ideally would be about 3 sessions. But again, it depends on how long the big escape sequence happens. And at the end of all of that, I believe is when they get to level 4, when they arrive in Kalamon, now fully aware that there's a giant dragon army conquering people, and they get to do a lot of cool army logistic stuff in chapter 4. But I think that is going to do it for the purposes of this crafting video, our very first crafting for Dragonlance. Let me know if you enjoyed this format. I mean, I basically did the same as all my craftings, except I just wasn't able to live stream it. Again, I don't know if I'll be able to ever live stream these, or it might just be an occasional thing, or what's going on. But this week, I just really couldn't find the time to do anything but do a quick little video here. Which quick, you know what? It still ended up being almost an hour, so you still get the quality stuff. But also, let me know if you ran Dragonlance and what you've been doing, especially for these first opening chapters and stuff. Give a comment down in the YouTubes, or especially go over to our Discord channel, where there's a whole Discord server, and we have a whole Dragonlance channel where we can talk about stuff. If you do want to talk about specifically DM prep, though, we've got a no players allowed channel that might be the best thing to do, because it does get tricky when my patron players should not actually see the information. So maybe comments on YouTube might be the best place, because that's probably where they won't actually see the stuff. But do check out our Discord server to be able to discuss things, and I'm generally very active on there. All right, thank you so much for watching, and of course, shout out to the patrons for helping make all of these sessions happen. Shouts to Platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Thomas, Stan, Brandon, Zenicider, Roleplay Roll, Christopher, Big Nut, John, Nathan, Andrew, Stephanie, Jason, Limpy's Plus, Warden, Eudaimonia, Tom, They're Eating the Dogs, Marcus, Snuggy, Hugo, Jerry, Shay, and Matthew. Gold patrons: RPG Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Lizard Lounge, Jerome, Nathan, Fascatora, Scott Rufus, Jerry, Glenn, and Mark. Thank you all very much for your support.